what if I told you that the angels in the nativity story weren't actually singing some sweet, peaceful lullaby, but were like a literal military host declaring treason against the Roman Empire?
Right. It completely changes the vibe, doesn't it?
Totally. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking this massive stack of sources. We've got historical analyses, theological commentaries, ancient biblical texts, even some sociological research on the first century, and we are completely deconstructing the nativity story.
Yeah, we're really taking it apart.
Because, I mean, if you are someone who loves those aha moments and just hates when fascinating history gets watered down, this is for you. If you're used to, pulling those pristine little porcelain figures out of a cardboard box and arranging this tidy, quiet scene on your mantelpiece, prepare to have that image completely upended.
Oh, absolutely. Because to truly understand the text we're analyzing today, we really have to discard that lens of a 21st century consumer.
Right.
We need to put ourselves in the sandals of a first century peasant who was living under military occupation. The original accounts, particularly in the Gospel of Luke, they are not quaint fairy tales. They are layered with immense theological tension and just raw historical reality.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even look at the iconic elements of the birth itself, we have to figure out why this couple, Mary and Joseph, was even traveling in the first place.
Right, the journey.
Yeah. You have ancient Jewish prophecy and brutal Roman politics on a total collision course here. According to our sources, they're traveling from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And Nazareth wasn't some bustling hub, right? It was a tiny hamlet. We're talking maybe 4 hectares, which is just under 10 acres, with a population of barely a few hundred people.
Yeah, it was an utterly insignificant speck on the map of the Roman Empire. I mean, it lacked paved streets, public baths, or any of the hallmarks of a developing ancient city. It was strictly a place of subsistence farming and manual labor.
And from that tiny speck, they have to make a journey of over 140 kilometers south to Bethlehem, which, if Mary is heavily pregnant, the logistics of this journey seem nearly impossible. They didn't have paved highways.
No, definitely not.
They're navigating the brutal topography of first-century Palestine.
You're looking at days, perhaps over a week, of really grueling travel. The route from Galilee to Judea often required traversing steep, rocky elevations and then dropping down into the Jordan River Valley and dealing with extreme temperature shifts.
Wow.
Plus, travel in the ancient world was incredibly dangerous. You had the constant threat of banditry. So a family would likely have to join a larger caravan for safety, which means matching the really slow, arduous pace of traders and livestock.
And the kicker is the reason they are subjecting themselves to all this danger. It's a Roman census decreed by Caesar Augustus. Which, I mean, imagine your own local government implementing a policy like this today. Think about having to pack up your family right now, leaving your livelihood behind, and walking across the state or even the country to your great-grandfather's hometown just to file a tax return.
Yeah, it sounds absurd to us. But the administrative mandate was, by design, completely uncompromising. A Roman census was not some benevolent demographic survey.
Right. They didn't just want to know how many people live there.
Exactly. It was the primary mechanism for taxation. It was designed to extract wealth from conquered provinces to feed the massive, hungry machine of the Roman military and its infrastructure. They wanted to know exactly who was in their territories and what they owned so they could tax it efficiently.
But that brings up a major historical sticking point in our sources. Critics often point to the timeline of the census and claim, the Gospel of Luke simply got the history wrong.
Like Quirinius debate.
Yeah, exactly. The text mentions this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. But non-biblical records place Quirinius in that official role years later, right?
Right. This raises a really important question regarding ancient translation and Roman provincial administration. The debate revolves around the fact that the historian Josephus records Quirinius becoming the official governor of Syria in 6 AD.
Which is, a decade after Jesus was supposedly born?
Roughly a decade after the generally accepted time, yes.
Yeah.
However, linguistic scholars in our sources point to the Greek word used in Luke's text, which is protos.
Which usually translates to first, right?
Often, yes. But it can also be legitimately translated as before. So reading the text as this census took place before Quirinius was governor completely resolves the timeline discrepancy.
Oh, wow. Just one word changes the whole context.
It's exactly. Furthermore, the Greek term Luke uses for governor, hegemonio, was actually a broader administrative term. It wasn't strictly a title for an official Roman legate. Quirinius was a highly active military commander leading expeditions in the region well prior to his official governorship.
Okay, so joint rule or overlapping terms were pretty common back then.
Very common in the volatile eastern provinces of the empire, yeah.
So the historical record has a lot more nuance than just a simple chronological error. And the underlying theological claim here is staggering when you think about it. Caesar Augustus, arguably the most powerful man on the planet, issues a bureaucratic decree to count his subjects and extract their wealth.
Right.
And according to the narrative, God uses this exact imperial audit to move a peasant couple 140 kilometers south, completely fulfilling a 700-year-old prophecy.
Yeah. The prophet Micah. 7 centuries earlier, he predicted that a ruler whose origins are from ancient days would come out of Bethlehem Ephrathah. The text presents this profound irony. The sweeping, arrogant machinery of the Roman Empire is unwittingly serving the sovereign purposes of God, ensuring the Messiah is born in the exact ancestral town of King David.
It's amazing. Okay, so they survive the journey, they navigate the brutal terrain and the bureaucracy, and they finally arrive in Bethlehem. Now we have to look at where they actually stayed.
Yes.
Because here's where it gets really interesting. We have to dismantle the biggest misconception of the entire holiday season, which is the inn. I mean, every school pageant features some kid with a drawn-on beard shouting, "No room at the inn."
Oh, absolutely.
But our sources completely debunk that.
They do. The famous innkeeper is a complete fiction of later traditions. The Gospel of Luke uses the Greek word kataluma. If we look at how that word is used in other ancient texts, including elsewhere in the New Testament, it translates to guest room or upper room. It does not mean a commercial hotel.
Wait, so if the writer wanted to say motel or inn, wouldn't he just use a different word?
He absolutely would.
Mhm.
When Luke wants to refer to a public commercial lodging place, for example, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, where a man pays an innkeeper to care for an injured traveler, he uses the Greek word pandošion.
Okay.
But here in the birth narrative, he specifically uses kataluma.
Hmm.
We have to remember the economics of Bethlehem, too. It was a tiny village off the main Roman trading routes. Small villages simply did not have the economic volume to sustain a commercial pandošion. Travelers relied entirely on the cultural bedrock of first-century Jewish hospitality.
Which means a family would never turn away a relative,
Yeah.
right? Especially one who was about to give birth. The social shame of doing that would be catastrophic in an honor and shame culture.
Exactly.
So it wasn't a neon no vacancy sign at a Motel 6. It was more like sleeping in your cousin's heated garage because all the spare bedrooms were already taken by older relatives.
That's a great analogy. The kataluma, the upper guest room of their relative's ancestral home, was simply full. Because of the census mandate, older or more prominent relatives had likely arrived earlier and claimed those designated sleeping quarters. To understand the alternative, we have to look at the architecture of a typical peasant home from that era.
Right.
They were often U-shaped or built with a split-level design.
So instead of a separate barn out back, like we always picture, the animals were actually brought inside the house structure.
During the cold Judean nights, absolutely. The family slept on the slightly elevated section of the house, and the lower level, which was sometimes a small cave structure the house was built over, or maybe an attached stone enclosure, was the domestic stable.
Huh.
The family's valuable livestock were brought into this lower level to protect them from the cold and from theft. And their body heat also helped warm the house.
So since the upper guest room is full of elders and other relatives, Mary and Joseph are relegated to this lower domestic stable area. They are sleeping essentially on the floor of the garage, surrounded by the sights, sounds, and smells of agricultural life.
What's fascinating here is how the biblical writers deliberately resist the temptation to sanitize this moment. In the ancient world, if you were inventing a myth to legitimize a new king or a deity, you would place his birth in a marble palace, or at the very least a clean, respectable estate surrounded by elite attendants.
You definitely wouldn't place it in the dirt and grime of an animal enclosure.
Never. Grounding the arrival of the divine squarely in the messy reality of everyday peasant life makes a profound theological statement. The text suggests the creator of the universe arrives without any royal fanfare, descending directly into the unpleasant odors and grit of the absolute lowest tier of human domestic life.
Which brings us to the defining prop of this entire story, right? Because they are lodging in the animal area, the newborn is placed in a manger. And I've always pictured this cute little wooden cradle filled with fresh golden hay. But our sources suggest a much heavier, more practical reality.
A manger in first-century Judea was often carved directly out of a solid block of stone, or built with heavy, rough-hewn wood. It is literally a feeding trough for livestock.
Literally a trough.
Yeah, farmers kept these troughs well supplied with fodder so the cattle and donkeys wouldn't starve during the winter. The English word manger actually derives from the Latin word mandicare, which means to eat.
Wait, a feeding trough for the person who later grows up to say, I am the bread of life.
Yep, the theological symbolism is incredibly rich. Animals approach the manger for physical sustenance, for literal fodder. By placing Jesus in that exact spot, the narrative signifies that he is an infinite storehouse of spiritual nourishment. It perfectly foreshadows his eventual mission. He isn't arriving merely as a moral teacher or a political rebel. The text presents him as the ultimate spiritual sustenance for humanity. Anyone, regardless of their status, can approach this trough and never go spiritually hungry.
It totally transforms the manger from just a makeshift bed into a banquet table. But if they were down in that cold stone trough among the livestock, how are they actually keeping a newborn safe? Let's look at what the baby is actually wearing, because the swaddling cloths mentioned in the text are far more than just some primitive baby blanket.
Right, swaddling was a highly specific, functional medical practice in first-century Judea. Ancient writings, including those discovered at Qumran, detailed the rigorous Jewish birth practices of the time. It wasn't simply tossing a cloth over the child. The newborn was first washed, then rubbed with salt.
Salt? That sounds kind of abrasive, doesn't it?
It was done for purification purposes, actually. They believed it helped strengthen and cleanse the skin. Following the salt rub, the infant was tightly wrapped in long strips of linen cloth.
Like, completely bound up.
Yes, this binding was thought to ensure proper limb growth, keeping the arms and legs straight, and it provided a deep sense of security and warmth. It simulated the tight environment of the womb.
So it's an intense level of physical care.
A vital level of care. To understand its cultural weight, we can look at the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 16, verse 4. In that text, an unswaddled baby is used as a horrifying metaphor for utter abandonment. God speaks to Jerusalem, saying, "On the day you were born, your cord was not cut, nor were you washed, nor wrapped in swaddling clothes."
Oh, I see.
By explicitly noting that Jesus was swaddled, the Gospel of Luke is signaling that despite the harsh surroundings, this child was deeply wanted, intensely cared for, and loved.
It's a striking contrast when you step back and look at it. You have it being described as the eternal creator who crafted galaxies, and his very first human experience is being physically immobilized by tight linen strips. It's like putting a supernova in a straitjacket. It's the ultimate loss of autonomy.
That loss of autonomy is exactly the theological point being made. The Apostle Paul later touches on this in the letter to the Philippians chapter 2, stating that Jesus emptied himself of divine privilege to take the form of a servant.
Wow.
That restriction, that willing submission to vulnerability, begins the moment he takes his first breath, and it establishes a profound set of theological bookends for his life on earth.
Because he is bound in linen at his death, too.
From cradle to cross. He enters the world wrapped tightly in restrictive linen birth cloths, and he leaves the world wrapped in restrictive linen burial cloths in a stone tomb. He is completely, unavoidably bound to the fragility of the human experience.
The narrative takes this intensely personal, restrictive physical reality, the swaddling clothes and the stone feeding trough, and turns it into a beacon. Because the angels tell the shepherds, this will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger.
Right.
But why that specific sign? And more importantly, why give that sign to shepherds? Let's talk about the VIP invite list to this birth.
To understand the significance of the shepherds, we really have to strip away centuries of pastoral romance. We tend to view shepherds through a very soft, idyllic lens today. But by the first century, the social standing of a shepherd had absolutely plummeted.
I always found that confusing because historically, aren't shepherds celebrated in the ancient texts? I mean, King David, the greatest king of Israel, was a shepherd. Moses was a shepherd before he led the Exodus.
They were, but society had undergone a massive shift over those centuries. Israel transitioned from a largely nomadic pastoral society to a settled agrarian and property-based culture centered around urban hubs like Jerusalem.
Okay.
As farming and private property became the economic drivers, flocks of sheep became a massive nuisance. They wandered, they grazed on private crops, and their keepers were viewed with deep suspicion.
So they went from being the rugged heroes of the frontier to being viewed as trespassers and thieves.
Exactly. Furthermore, the religious purity laws had become highly codified. Shepherds lived out in the dirt, dealing with animal carcasses, blood, and the elements. They couldn't observe the strict ritual washing and Sabbath laws demanded by the religious elite.
Right.
Rabbinic traditions of the time went so far as to label shepherds as permanently unclean. They were the anawim, the vulnerable, marginalized, working poor. They were social pariahs.
And they're completely nameless in the text, too. Our sources emphasize that we know the names of Mary, Joseph, Zechariah, Elizabeth. We even know the names of the Roman bureaucrats in Syria. But the shepherds are just faceless laborers working the night shift out in the cold.
Yet the narrative insists that God knows exactly where they are in the dark and values exactly who they are. The prominent theologians and high priests in Jerusalem who had the scrolls and had been studying the prophecies for generations, they are completely bypassed.
Wow.
The homeless laborers in the fields get the royal invitation.
And the manger is the only sign that would actually work for them. Think about it. If the angel had said, "The new king is born, go to the governor's palace in Jerusalem," the royal guards would have taken one look at these dirty, unwashed laborers and chased them away with spears.
They wouldn't even get past the gate.
Exactly. But a baby in a peasant home, sleeping in an animal's feeding trough, that is a sign of welcome, tailored specifically for people at the bottom. It's a localized proof that this new reality won't reject them.
It's the ultimate subversion of status. It's an invitation demonstrating that you don't need pedigree, cleanliness, or social standing to approach the divine. But while the target of the message was the marginalized, we really have to examine the content of the message itself.
Yeah.
Because the language the angels used to deliver this invitation is anything but passive. It is a direct, calculated challenge to the most powerful military empire on Earth.
This is the part of our research that completely changed how I view the story. We've established the shepherds got the message. But the announcement wasn't a serene choir singing a lullaby. It was a subversive, treasonous political announcement.
Yes.
The angels appear and say, "I bring you good news," and they announce the arrival of a Savior and Lord using the Greek word Kyrios.
Which raises an essential question. Why those specific words in that specific era? In the first century Roman world, good news, which in Greek is evangelizo, the root of our word evangelism, and titles like Savior and Lord, were not merely religious jargon.
Right.
They were the exact copyrighted political terms used on state inscriptions to describe Caesar Augustus.
They were literal imperial propaganda.
There's a famous historical inscription from 9 BC found in Asia Minor celebrating Augustus's birthday. The inscription literally calls him a god and a savior and proclaims that his birth was the beginning of good news for the world.
So when the angels show up in the sky over Bethlehem using those exact buzzwords, they aren't just saying a nice prayer. You're telling me they're throwing down a political gauntlet.
The text leaves absolutely no ambiguity about it. It describes the angels as a heavenly host. In ancient Greek literature, a host is a strictly military term. It refers to a heavily armed encampment.
Wow.
The shepherds are not looking at a choir, they are looking at a divine military force. God is declaring war on the oppressive systems of the world. He is announcing a true king whose peace will completely dismantle the Pax Romana.
The Roman peace, which, from my understanding of the history, wasn't very peaceful if you weren't a Roman citizen.
Not at all. The Pax Romana was maintained through sheer military brutality, heavy taxation, and state-sanctioned terror, such as mass crucifixions for anyone who rebelled. Caesar brought peace by crushing his enemies into submission.
Right.
The subversive contrast here is that this new king, the true Kyrios, brings peace by lying completely vulnerable in a feeding trough, absorbing the world's violence rather than inflicting it.
The shepherd's reaction suddenly makes total sense. The original text says they feared a great fear. That's a Semitic idiom for absolute paralyzing terror. They aren't scared of the dark. They are standing before an invading military force.
But the leading angel counters that terror by offering them great joy. And that specific phrase, great joy, is used only 5 times in the entire New Testament.
Wait, really? Only 5?
It's just 5. And every single time it appears, it is tied to a massive, paradigm-shifting divine action, like the resurrection. It signals that reality itself has been altered.
The angels are declaring that the true Lord of the world has arrived, and he is not the guy sitting on the marble throne in Rome. He's the infant in the domestic stable.
If we connect this to the bigger historical picture, this specific angelic announcement sets the ideological stage for the next 3 centuries of the early church. The intensely subversive nature of these titles, Savior, Lord, Good News, is exactly why early Christians were later persecuted and martyred.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
They were not thrown to the lions simply because they worshipped a spiritual deity. I mean, the Roman pantheon had room for thousands of gods. They were executed because they publicly declared Jesus is Lord, which inherently meant Caesar is not. To the Roman authorities, it was high treason.
So, what does this all mean for you as you're listening today? The next time you walk past a quiet, sanitized nativity scene on a front lawn, or you see those little porcelain figures on a mantle, you'll know the radical history humming just beneath the surface.
Exactly.
It wasn't a silent, sterile night in a wooden barn. It was a subversive, gritty reality. An eternal king bypasses the palaces and the bureaucracy of empires to arrive in the mud of a domestic stable. He is placed in a stone feeding trough to offer spiritual sustenance to a starving world, and he comes physically bound in restrictive cloths to welcome the unclean, marginalized outcasts of society.
And his birth is announced by a heavenly military force challenging the sovereignty of the greatest human empire on earth. Understanding that historical and cultural context changes everything about how we read the text. It demands a response rather than just a polite nod.
Yeah, really has.
But, we've spent all this time diving into the shepherds, the angels, the reality of the manger, and the Roman bureaucracy. Well, we haven't touched on the wise men, the magi, and the Star of Bethlehem.
Oh, right. The mysterious figures from the east.
The historical sources mention them briefly, but consider this final thought. What if that star wasn't just a simple, pretty navigational tool guiding them across the desert? What if it was a massive cosmic aligning that ancient astronomers and kingmakers from the East understood as a geopolitical alarm bell? An event completely outside the control of both the Jewish high priests in Jerusalem and the Roman emperor in Rome, signaling to rival empires that the entire balance of power in the universe had just shifted.
Man, that is definitely something to think about the next time you look up at the night sky. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope digging into these sources sparked a few aha moments and gave you a totally new lens on a familiar story. Until next time, keep asking questions and keep digging deeper.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.